12 years of silence is not just time passing. It is a practice, a discipline, a choice made every single morning. For her, hiding her sealed past was not about shame or regret. It was survival in a different form. She had spent years living in a world where every word mattered, where secrets kept people alive, and where vulnerability could cost everything. When she finally stepped out of that world, she wanted peace more than anything. She wanted to feel ordinary. She wanted to breathe without scanning every rooftop or doorway. So she built a life that looked simple from the outside, and she treated that life like a shield. Her neighbors saw a calm face, a steady presence, someone who kept to herself but showed kindness when it counted. What they never saw were the old instincts that kept firing under the surface. The habit of watching people's hands before their eyes. The way she chose seats that allowed a full view of exits. The way she walked her neighborhood in quiet circuits, checking for changes without even realizing she was doing it. 12 years is long enough to soften the edges of memory, but not long enough to erase how she had been trained to think. She learned to silence her past in conversations. When people talked about their college days or their early careers, she kept her answers brief. She mentioned travel, but never said where. She spoke of teamwork, but not of the kind that took place in the dark during missions no one would ever read about. The discipline of omission became part of her voice. The less she shared, the safer she felt. She kept her medals packed away in a box she never opened. She kept her photographs locked in a drawer that stayed untouched. Each year she told herself she would go through them, but she never did. Her silence deepened not because she forgot who she was, but because she knew exactly what that life demanded. Being a SEAL had shaped every bone in her body. It had carved a level of resilience that few understood. It had also cost her sleep, relationships, and pieces of herself she did not always know how to name. When she walked away, she promised herself she would never return to the chaos that had once defined her. To keep that promise, she needed distance. And distance required silence. People sometimes asked if she had ever thought about joining the military. She would smile and say she considered it once. That answer felt like a small betrayal of the truth, but it also kept the conversation from drifting into territory she did not want to revisit. There were questions she feared more than she feared danger. Why did you leave? What happened over there? Do you miss it? She could not answer those without unlocking doors she wanted permanently shut. The 12 years also brought a strange form of guilt. She knew others had stayed longer. Others had given more. Others had not made it back at all. She carried their names like weight in her chest. Civilian life gave her space to breathe, but it also gave her space to remember. And in that space, she found a quiet that often turned into reflection, and reflection sometimes felt heavier than any deployment. Yet she kept moving. She volunteered in her community. She learned how to grow a small garden. She picked up hobbies that had nothing to do with strategy or survival. She learned the comfort of a routine that never required adrenaline. To those around her, she seemed steady, reliable, even gentle. None of them knew that she had once crawled through the dirt under live fire or swum through black water with only the sound of her own breath to guide her. None of them knew that she had carried teammates through missions that pushed the limits of human endurance. None of them imagined that the quiet woman living down the street had already lived a lifetime of extremes before she ever moved in. Her silence became part of her personality. It made people assume she was private by nature, not by necessity. It made her past feel distant enough to leave untouched. She believed she had closed that chapter for good. She believed the world she left behind would never reach for her again. She believed 12 years was long enough for even the strongest ties to fade. A quiet life built on avoiding old shadows does not happen by accident. She shaped it with intention, piece by piece, the way someone might build a shelter after a storm. Her new routines were simple. She woke up at the same hour each day, brewed the same coffee, walked the same path around the neighborhood. Predictability comforted her. It gave her something she never had during her service, a sense of control. In the teams, unpredictability was part of the job. Plans shifted without warning, conditions changed fast, and every decision carried weight. Now she found peace in knowing nothing unexpected waited around the corner. She picked a home in a place where people minded their own business but still waved from across the street. She liked the balance. Close enough to feel part of something, distant enough to stay unseen. Her neighbors chatted about yard work, school events, the occasional complaint about parking. The conversations were light, and that was exactly what she wanted. No tension, no big questions, no memories pushed to the surface. Just a normal rhythm she could slip into without effort. Inside her home, she curated her surroundings with care. No reminders of combat. No keepsakes from missions. Her walls held art that meant peace to her. Landscapes. Seascapes. Nothing that hinted at the water she once swam through in the dead of night with a team, depending on her silence. She chose furniture for comfort rather than practicality. Soft chairs instead of the rugged gear she once lived with. This environment was more than a preference. It was a buffer between who she used to be and who she wanted to become. Even her friendships followed this pattern. She kept her circle small. People who accepted her quiet nature without prying. They invited her to barbecues, holiday gatherings, weekend hikes. She joined when she could, but she always kept enough distance to protect the boundaries she built. She enjoyed their company, but she never fully rested when others were around. The habit of being aware of every sound, every movement, stayed with her. She listened more than she spoke. She watched before she acted. The old training never left. It simply settled deeper into her. She worked a job that allowed her to stay out of the spotlight. Nothing high pressure, nothing that required her to lead or fight or make life or death decisions. She liked tasks that were clear and steady. Routine gave her room to breathe. Coworkers saw her as reliable and calm. They appreciated that she never stirred up conflict. Some thought she lived a quiet life because she preferred it. None of them knew it was the quiet that kept her from being pulled back into memories she spent years trying to bury. Avoiding old shadows sometimes meant avoiding certain places. Crowded rooms made her uneasy. Loud noises triggered reactions she wished she could erase. Fireworks in the summer brought tension into her shoulders. She planned her errands for quieter hours. She chose restaurants where she could sit with her back protected. She parked near exits without thinking about it. These choices were second nature, shaped by years of training and experience she no longer spoke about. To others they looked like quirks. To her, they were survival patterns she could not turn off. She also avoided conversations that hinted at the military. When people bragged about relatives in service or spoke casually about war, she stayed silent. The language people used in those moments felt careless to her. It reminded her of things she had witnessed, decisions she had made, and the weight she carried long after she left the field. Avoiding these topics kept her grounded. It allowed her to remain the version of herself she carefully constructed. 12 years is a long time to maintain distance from an entire part of life. Still, she managed to build a world where those shadows rarely reached her. She found comfort in small rituals, evening walks, quiet dinners, books that transported her far from anything that reminded her of her past. She learned how to sleep again, even if the sleep was light. She learned how to feel safe enough to relax, even if only in brief moments. But beneath the quiet, those old shadows never fully disappeared. They lived in her muscle memory, in the way she assessed strangers, in the way she noticed things others overlooked, in the way she could sense tension before anyone else in the room felt it. They lived in the dreams that came without warning. They lived in the silence she used to protect herself from slipping back into a world she worked hard to escape. The unexpected call that changed everything came on a morning that looked like any other. She had just finished her run, the same route she followed most days, steady and predictable. Her mind was quiet. Her breathing had settled. She set her phone on the counter while she made breakfast. When it rang, the sound felt ordinary at first. Just another reminder she still lived in a world where people checked in, scheduled appointments, or asked small questions about neighborhood plans. But then she saw the caller ID. 3 simple words that froze her in place. She stared at the screen long enough for the call to almost slip into voicemail. Her hands did not shake, but her heartbeat changed rhythm. 12 years of distance collapsed in seconds. She answered with a voice she had not used in more than a decade. Calm, controlled, steady. The voice of someone trained to respond even when the world tilted. The person on the other end spoke her name with the tone of someone who knew exactly who she had been and who she still was beneath the life she built. Hearing that tone again pulled something inside her tight. It reminded her of briefings before missions, of radios crackling in darkness, of orders given in low voices because silence meant survival. It reminded her of a version of herself she had sealed away because it carried both strength and weight she no longer wanted to hold. The call was short, direct, nothing unnecessary. The way the teams always communicated. They told her a situation had shifted. They told her they needed her experience. They told her she was being asked, not ordered, but the difference in wording did not change the impact. She listened without interrupting. Old instincts slid back into place effortlessly. The part of her trained to assess, analyze, and react woke up before she realized it. She hated how natural it felt. When the call ended, she stayed still for a long moment. Her kitchen around her looked the same. Her coffee was still hot. The morning sun still fell across the counter. Yet none of it felt familiar anymore. The quiet life she had worked so hard to build seemed fragile, almost like scenery she had stepped behind but never fully inhabited. The space felt too small now, too gentle for the memories rushing back. She replayed the voice in her mind. The phrasing, the tone, the unspoken urgency. She knew the signs. Calls like that were never made unless something mattered, truly mattered. And even though she had walked away, even though she believed she was done, she also knew that when the teams reached out after so many years, they were not looking for convenience. They were reaching for someone they trusted, someone who had proven themselves, someone who had a skill set that could not be easily replaced. She told herself she could ignore it. She could say no. She could let the past stay where it was. But her body did not believe her. Her training did not believe her. Every part of her that had gone through selection, through deployments, through situations most people would never imagine, understood the weight behind that call. It was not random. It was not casual. It was a door opening back into a world she thought she had locked from the outside. She walked through her house in slow steps, noticing details she usually overlooked. The framed pictures of quiet places she visited, the books she kept on her shelves, the calm color of her walls. All of it reminded her of the years spent rebuilding herself. She had wanted softness because she had lived through hardness. She had wanted peace because she had survived chaos. And now the past had found her anyway, not through memory, but through a voice asking her to return. The timing unsettled her. Why now? Why after 12 years? Why her, when so many others had stayed active? But she knew better than to believe it was coincidence. If they said they needed her, it meant the situation aligned with her specific strengths. She wondered if the people around her would notice anything different as the news settled in her mind. She wondered if her neighbors would sense a shift in her posture. She wondered if she could hide the storm building inside her long enough to decide what she would do. The unexpected call did not shout. It did not demand. It simply pressed its weight against the quiet life she had built until the walls around her past started to feel thin. It reminded her of the person she used to be and the person she tried to become. It forced her to look at the distance she had created and question whether it could hold. And in that moment, standing in the stillness of her kitchen with her phone dimming in her hand, she realized that the past she had outrun for 12 years had just stepped back into the room with her. A duty that refuses to stay buried does not knock politely. It sits in the back of the mind, waiting for the right moment to rise. After the call, she tried to push it away. She tried to focus on ordinary tasks, on the routines she built to keep her life balanced. She washed the dishes. She folded laundry. She walked to the mailbox and back. Every movement was slow, controlled, deliberate, as if she could keep her thoughts quiet by forcing her body to stay steady. But duty is not that easily silenced. It seeped into her thoughts with the persistence of something that had shaped her far too deeply to ignore. She had spent years convincing herself she was done. She had served with everything she had. She had given more than most knew. She had walked away because she needed to, because staying any longer might have broken her. But stepping away did not erase what she learned or who she became. It did not erase the instinct to protect. It did not erase the sense of responsibility that had been drilled into her through every challenge, every hour of training, every mission that demanded her best. Those instincts lived in her even when she did her best to bury them under quiet routines and peaceful choices. As the day went on, the weight behind the call grew heavier. She replayed the details she had been given, the tone of the voice, the seriousness that sat between the lines, the request that was not quite a request. She knew what it meant. She knew the teams would not reach out unless the situation was severe, unless lives were at stake, unless they needed someone who could handle the pressure not just with skill, but with clarity. She tried to convince herself that someone else could go. Someone younger. Someone still in the system. Someone untouched by 12 years of distance. But the truth settled quickly. If they reached for her, it meant they believed she was still the right one for the job. She sat on her couch for a long time, staring at the wall without really seeing it. Every part of her wanted to stay where she was. She liked the quiet. She liked the life she built brick by brick. She liked the safety of routine. But beneath that comfort lived the knowledge that safety was never guaranteed for anyone. She had seen too much to pretend otherwise. And now, somewhere beyond the quiet edges of her neighborhood, something was happening that needed her. The idea gnawed at her. It felt wrong to ignore it. It felt wrong to pretend she could detach from everything she used to stand for. Duty is not always about obligation. Sometimes it is about identity. She had tried to redefine herself for 12 years, yet the moment the call came, she felt the old purpose stir. Not because she wanted the danger or the chaos, but because she had once promised herself she would always show up when it mattered. That promise had been buried, but not destroyed. It pulsed under her ribs with a steady beat she could not deny. The more she tried to push it away, the stronger it came back. She walked outside to clear her head. The street was calm. A neighbor waved from across the yard. A dog barked in the distance. Life moved normally around her, unaware that something inside her had shifted. She watched the sky, listened to the wind, and felt the contrast between her peaceful world and the call that had pulled her mind elsewhere. She wondered if anyone looking at her would guess that she was weighing a decision that could change everything again. She doubted it. She had become skilled at hiding her storms. As she continued down the sidewalk, memories surfaced without warning. The feeling of stepping into the water before dawn. The sound of a helicopter far above. The focused breath before breaching a door. The quiet nods exchanged with teammates who trusted her with their lives. She had tried for years to file those memories away, to let them fade. Now they returned with clarity that unsettled her. They were reminders of the person she once was, the one who would have answered the call without hesitating. When she returned home, she sat with the reality she could no longer outrun. Something in her had already made the decision, even if she had not spoken it aloud. Duty had risen from the place she tried to bury it, not with force, but with familiarity. It reminded her of the responsibility she once carried and the oath she never truly let go of. And no matter how much she tried to stay anchored in the quiet life she created, she could feel the pull growing stronger, steady and unrelenting, waiting for her to acknowledge it. The cost of returning to the life she left began to show itself long before she said yes. It began the moment she realized she was considering it. She felt it in the shift of her breathing, in the way her shoulders tightened, in the quiet ache behind old scars. She had spent 12 years learning how to live slowly, how to settle into calm mornings and predictable days. Stepping back into that world meant stepping away from the stability she fought so hard to build. She knew the price, and she felt it rising in front of her like a wall she had climbed once, but was not sure she could climb again. The first cost was emotional. She remembered how the job demanded everything. It demanded strength even on days when she felt empty. It demanded decisions that left marks on the heart long after missions were over. Returning meant opening herself to that weight again. It meant accepting the pressure that came with every operation, the constant awareness that one mistake could change everything. She had once learned to carry that weight with discipline, but it had taken her years to set it down. Picking it up again felt like lifting something she was not sure her spirit could bear. The next cost was physical. Her body still held the conditioning of her past, but it was not the same. Age, time, and distance had changed her. She stayed active, but the brutal demands of SEAL life were different from anything civilian living could replicate. She thought about the years of punishing training, the grueling missions, the recovery that often began only after the danger had passed. She wondered if returning meant pushing her body too far. She knew she could still fight. She knew she could still endure. But endurance came with a price, and she would have to pay it in full. She also had to consider what she would lose by going back. She had built a life that finally felt safe, a home with routines that grounded her, neighbors who saw her as steady, friends who knew her as calm and quiet, not as someone who once carried out missions that never made the news. Returning meant stepping away from that peace. It meant disappearing again without explanation. It meant leaving behind the stability she found only after years of feeling lost. She wondered how her absence would be explained, how her life would shift, how long it would take to rebuild everything if she came back changed. Another cost lurked deeper, one she rarely acknowledged. Returning meant reopening the emotional doors she had locked. She had spent 12 years suppressing memories that once woke her at night. She had learned how to breathe through the echoes of things she witnessed. Going back risked pulling those memories forward. The noise, the fear, the adrenaline, the loss. She was not sure she had the strength to settle them again once they resurfaced. She feared the idea of carrying new ones on top of the old. She also knew the cost to her sense of identity. For years she had been working to redefine who she was without the uniform. She learned how to be someone who could enjoy quiet moments and simple joys. Going back meant stepping once more into the version of herself that the job required. Focused, controlled, silent, efficient. That version was powerful, but also isolating. It left little space for softness. She had grown to value that softness. Losing it again felt like trading a piece of her humanity for the sake of duty. There was another cost she tried not to think about: the risk. She had beaten the odds before, but every mission carried danger, and danger did not care about experience or history. She wondered if returning meant risking her life in a way she had promised herself she would never do again. She wondered if she could face that reality with the same resolve she once had. She wondered if leaving her quiet life to answer the call meant accepting that she might not return to it. As she paced through her house, these costs layered over one another, forming a weight she could feel in her chest. Returning was not a simple decision. It was not a matter of pride or ego. It was a matter of sacrifice, and she knew she would pay for it with time, energy, peace, and pieces of herself she had worked hard to heal. Yet she also knew she was someone who never backed away when something important was at stake. The cost was steep, but the stakes, she sensed, were even higher. What her story teaches about courage and identity begins with the truth that courage is rarely loud. It is not always a grand moment or a dramatic leap. Sometimes courage looks like silence, like hiding the parts of yourself that once defined you, because showing them would hurt too much. For 12 years, she lived quietly, letting the world think she was someone ordinary. That was not cowardice. It was strength. It was choosing healing over intensity, choosing peace over pressure, choosing space over the constant demands of a life built on danger. Her story shows that courage can be a decision to step back, not just a decision to step forward. Identity, too, is more complicated than people think. Most believe identity is fixed, that you are who you are, and that does not change. She learned the opposite. In the teams, she was a force, someone trained to endure hardship, to push past limits, to operate in places where failure was not an option. After leaving, she became someone who nurtured quiet routines and simple pleasures. Those two versions of her were not contradictions. They were layers. She discovered that identity is not one story, but many, and that the hardest part is deciding which story you are willing to keep living. Her story shows that you can leave a world behind without erasing the parts of you it built. Another lesson her journey carries is that duty does not disappear just because you walk away from it. People often imagine that once you step out of a role, you are free from its influence. She learned that duty can live in the bones, in the reflexes, in the unspoken promises made long ago. Even after years of distance, The call awakened something real in her. Not nostalgia, not ego, a sense of responsibility that felt deeper than choice. Her story teaches that duty is not always tied to rules or authority. Sometimes it is tied to the core of who you are, and even if you bury it, it waits. Her return to that world, even in the consideration of it, reveals another truth. The past has a way of testing what you say you believe. She believed she was done. She believed she had earned her peace. She believed she had built a new identity strong enough to stand on its own. But when the past rose, she learned that beliefs are comfortable until pressure pushes against them. Her story teaches that identity is tested in the moments when you must choose between who you were and who you want to be. Courage lies in facing that choice honestly, even when both paths carry pain. Her life also highlights the cost of transformation. She did not simply leave the seals. She rebuilt herself from the ground up. That process required vulnerability she had never allowed before, the kind of vulnerability that comes from admitting that strength is not limitless. When the call came, it threatened to unravel that work. Yet she did not break. She stood in the tension between the old and the new, acknowledging both without denying either. Her story teaches that real courage is found in the ability to hold conflicting truths at once. You can be both strong and tired. You can be capable and uncertain. You can be healed, yet still haunted. There is also a lesson about how isolation can hide resilience. Her neighbors thought she was private. Her friends thought she was introverted. No one understood that her quiet was not avoidance, but a shield. Behind that stillness lived someone who had survived things most would never imagine. She learned that she did not need recognition to validate her strength. She did not need admiration to know her worth. Her story teaches that the strongest people are often the ones who carry their stories silently, not because they are ashamed, but because they understand those stories are too heavy for casual conversation. Finally, her journey shows that identity is not a single moment of definition, but a constant negotiation between past and present. She feared that returning would erase the life she built. Yet part of her also knew she could not erase the part of herself shaped by the teams. Her story teaches that we do not abandon our pasts. We learn how to live with them. We learn how to let them inform our choices without dictating them. Courage is the willingness to face that truth, even when it pulls you in two directions. Her identity is not the life she hid or the life she lived after. It is the space between them, the place where she learned that strength is not just about what you endure, but about who you choose to become despite everything you once carried.